Good morning, Packers fans, and welcome into another episode of the Pancakes and Packers Morning Show. And today we're going to talk about day 3 of the draft and get into some of the UDFA reported signings the Packers have made, or at least some of the rookie minicamp tryouts as well. And overall, I'll just start by sharing, my initial impression of this Packers draft class. And the word that keeps coming back to my mind is impactful, not necessarily because of their initial impact on the field, though I think a number of them will have a huge impact, especially as we address some of those positions of needs with Edrin Cooper at linebacker, the three safeties that we picked, which all three of them I think will have some impact, whether on the defensive side of the ball or on teams. And then the offensive lineman, obviously, we started off by taking offensive tackle Jordan Morgan and then added some more on day 3 into that offensive line room. Some guys that you probably haven't heard of that we'll talk a little bit about today. And the main reason I think impactful, thank you, is we got some heavy hitters in this class, and we got guys that are aggressive and physical at the point of contact. And I think that's going to be something that is definitely a calling card of this Packers defense under Jeff Hafley. And we've talked about that, last week as we looked at some of the philosophy of what he would be looking for on the defensive side of the ball before we got into the draft. And I think this is just going to carry over into that. And at that point, we'll just go ahead and get right into the players that I think could potentially make an impact from day 3. And we started off in the 4th round by taking safety Evan Williams out of Oregon. Actually played several years before that at Fresno State. Started for, I believe, 45 games in his college career, but very impactful guy, Senior Bowl guy. The Packers love to take their guys that they pick up out of the Senior Bowl. It was actually voted the national team's best safety at the Senior Bowl. So you look at his RAS score, 8.2, good athlete. And we see like that 40-yard dash isn't hugely important at the safety position. Hey, calm down. Why do you want to wear the gloves anyway? It's not going to work with the tablet. Sorry about this. Good. Awesome. But that 40-yard dash score isn't something that's going to be hugely impactful at the safety position. That 4.6 is about the same as what Xavier McKinney ran when he was coming out of Alabama as well. Tends to take people and push them down the draft board a little bit, but at the NFL level, if they can show that they can play, which these guys look as if they're going to make an impact in the NFL, I think that's going to be good for the Packers. Next up, we ended up going with center Jacob Monk out of Duke, not the Duke offensive lineman a lot of us would have thought we'd have on our roster a couple weeks ago, but 5-year senior, still just barely under 23 years old, so he's not old despite the fact having been there for 5 years. Dane Brugler says he checks all the boxes functionally with size and movement skills. He's smooth in his change of direction and is a natural bender, which are great traits to have as an offensive lineman. Short-armed is what he says here, though, and his balance will rock when he leans and overextends. So a few things about his game that could be improved upon. Obviously, we don't have the agility testing, but the Packers saw enough out of him through their tape study and through their scouting that they felt he was worth a 5th-round pick and could potentially push on that interior offensive line and add some competition, which is another theme that comes back to this room, or this draft class rather, is the fact that we doubled up at linebacker, we tripled up at offensive line, And we're really adding pieces that no matter where they are on the roster, they're going to compete with the next guy ahead of them to push them forward. So Jacob Monk pushing on the interior of that offensive line, whether it's as a backup center behind Josh Myers, who went from being a for sure starter to potentially being pushed back down, depending on what they want to do with Jordan Morgan, who it sounds like they're going to try to start off um, at tackle, and then if that ends up working out early on in the process, they'll probably do as they alluded to earlier in this offseason and move Zach Tom inside, which completely shakes up this offensive line room. But in all of that turmoil and that change up, guys like Jacob Monk could be the um, the guys that benefit from that competition to push other guys forward. And I think it'll be a really interesting prospect for the Packers. Next up, we went another safety, Keaton Oladapo out of Oregon State. Um, top safety at the Senior Bowl, another Senior Bowl guy, but um, outstanding athlete. And a lot of people thought that this was a steal to get him in the 6th round. And a good athlete, but his aggressiveness on the field speaks for itself. And I think that's, again, coming back to that theme of like impact. These guys are fast and furious on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that's going to be huge as Jeff Hafley overhauls the culture on that defensive side of the ball. And it's clear that coming into this draft, you look at what the safety room looked like before coming in out of last year, going from Darnell Savage and Jonathan Owens, uh, Rudy Ford. Gosh, I'm drawing a blank on a lot of these guys right now. But going from all of them and Anthony Johnson Jr., who will be a holdover, obviously, as a second-year pro, to now having Xavier McKinney, having Javon Bullard, having Keaton Oladapo, having Evan Williams. It's an entirely different safety room. And as much as a lot of us, myself, like definitely pounding the table for cornerback in this draft, it wasn't addressed until a little bit later on, which we'll talk about shortly. But clearly that Jeff Hafley wanted a certain thing out of his defense. And I think seeing that they went 3 safeties relatively early is an indication that he felt a need to overhaul that safety room. Next up was a smaller school guy out of Georgia State, Travis Glover, an offensive tackle. You see that his RAS score isn't hugely impressive, but they obviously saw some stuff out of him that they were impressed with. And Dane Brugler had him as his 20th graded tackle in this draft class. Was in college from 2018 when he redshirted all the way up to 2023. Started pretty much the entirety of that time that he wasn't redshirted. And again, small school. He was first team all SBS, which I'm not even, is that Sun Belt Conference? I'm not 100% sure on that, which doesn't seem like it would be the Sun Belt given Georgia State. Not familiar with Georgia State, even though I live in Georgia. And it says massive framed blocker with girth throughout, plays wide and isn't easy to get around, has long arms and uses them to lock out and keep defenders off of him. Tough guy to move at the point of attack, even when his pads rise. Weaknesses, feet get heavy at times, and NFL wide speed will be a tall task for him. So some things that he can work on for sure. Developmental guy, probably looking at, somebody that they probably will keep on the practice squad early on and maybe has a similar path to the field as a Josh Nyman, where he's on the roster for 2 or 3 years, but then eventually gets his opportunity. And we'll see what happens with that opportunity. But the Packers are great at taking late round offensive linemen and developing them into something that they can put on the field and be a at least a quality backup. So that is Travis Glover, pardon me, out of Georgia State. Then we got to Michael Pratt, the guy that I was really surprised was here this late. Pick 245, I believe. And like really could have had him go off the board as early as the 4th round. I mean, there was a huge gap. Hush, dude. Hush. There was a huge gap between was it um the last quarterback taken in the 1st round, and then that next one, which was Spencer Rattler in the 4th round, I believe. So that huge lull and gap of quarterback draft probably attributed to the fact that Michael Pratt got pushed down, but a lot of people were pretty high on him. Not high enough that like he was going to come in and make an immediate impact, but somebody that you could get into the building, had the tools, and over the course of time was going to develop into somebody that could potentially be an NFL starting quality quarterback. And like to get him in the 7th round that late, pick 245, really good value. He was one of the guys that I thought had more of a higher ceiling that would be um, a good quarterback pick in this draft if they were going to look to push somebody along with Sean Clifford. I didn't want to take another guy that was just going to be a developmental guy, or that had a capped ceiling, that had a bunch of experience playing in college but wasn't going to necessarily ascend much on the NFL level. But I do think Michael Pratt has a higher ceiling, and they will be able to, you know, I saw somebody, I don't remember who it was, on Twitter talking about the fact that, you get him in, I think it might have been Andy Herman. You get him in the building while we still have Tom Clements in that quarterback room, and you give him the opportunity to learn and develop behind one of the best quarterback developmental coaches in NFL. So, really happy to see that we ended up landing Michael Pratt, and he is absolutely a steal at this point in the draft, as is the next guy, which at some points was much higher on even in the discussion of being a 1st round cornerback earlier in the draft process. But Kalen King, a bunch of starting experience at Penn State, and I mean, I'm assuming some of it is he had a little bit of a down season compared to his 2022 season, um, where he was almost certain to be a top 2 round pick coming into the 2023 season, but had a little bit of a down year. And then his testing numbers didn't impress anything too much. And you see 4.61 is not a speed that you really want as an outside corner. But I need to go back and look at his film to see how does that show up on tape. But if he can play ball, to get a guy that can play and can compete at the corner position, I actually think Jaden Reed tweeted out that this dude is not a 7th rounder. And actually, I believe, had a conversation with Kalen King before the pick was made, and told him, "Hey, we're going to come get you," kind of thing. And yeah, it's wild to see a talent like him get that far down. But you do see that Raz is, a little bit subpar for what the Packers typically target. But this is the 7th round we're talking about, so it's a bit forgivable to see them end up with a guy with a little bit more of a talent base on the field that isn't the shirt and shorts workout god that they typically target in the draft. But that was the 6 picks that we made on day 3 of the draft, and then we started to see some reports, and we'll go over and take a look at Acme Packing Company's page that outlines a lot of the reported UDFA signings, and then also the rookie minicamp tryout invitees. And we'll go ahead and let me see if I can blow this up a little bit so you guys can see it better. All right, so looking at the UDFA signings, Donovan Jenkins, offensive tackle, I believe, out of USF, started a bunch of football with them, and is reportedly signing with us as a undrafted free agent. James Esther, another guy, believe they had in for a visit out of Northern Illinois, defensive tackle. Trent Jones, offensive lineman from Michigan, that big school pedigree. To bring in a guy like that is going to compete at and is used to competing at a big school with big competition. could be valuable there. Tight end, Messiah Swinson out of Arizona State, Rodney Matthews, defensive lineman out of Ohio, and then hometown favorite, Peter Bowden, long snapper, viewed as the number one long snapper in this draft class, for the Packers to go out and get somebody that, their operation on special teams has been somewhat of an issue over the last several years. And to get a guy that could potentially come in and shore that up and meets the timelines, a young guy to go along with their young kicker, their young punter, even though there is competition in that kicking room. We'll see. Hey, you're being too loud. Mommy is trying to sleep. Then a running back, Jarvion Howard out of Alcorn State, linebacker Raylan Goforth out of Washington, and then receiver Julian Hicks out of Albany. Jeez. And then the reported tryouts for the rookie minicamp are kicker Alex McNulty out of Buffalo, cornerback Don Callis out of Troy, punter Porter Wilson out of Duke, offensive lineman out of UW La Crosse, Michael Bertoya, and then defensive end Roge Stone out of International Player Pathways. I want to look at that International Player Pathways piece a little bit more. I don't know if it's just a matter of he was part of that IPP program for another team. I'm not familiar with his name, and then that's how we signed him as a tryout, or if it's a matter of that exemption that we have to the roster that we had last year for Kenneth Odumegwo. If that would mean that essentially he and him are competing for that roster exemption spot where they'd be able to have a 91st player on this roster heading into camp rather than just 90. But some interesting guys to look at. And I haven't seen exactly when they are doing their rookie minicamp yet. I originally saw it was either going to be this upcoming weekend, this Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or it was going to be the following Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which I believe is the 11th, 12th, 13th, something to that effect. But when we get that, I'm going to try to see as much coverage as I can on that and be able to bring you some actual on the field highlights of these newest Packers in green and gold out at the Don Hudson Center for some rookie minicamp. Not a whole lot of, it's no contact, nothing crazy, running some drills, getting familiar with the coaching staff, and really just getting integrated into that NFL lifestyle. But overall, let me know, what do you think about this Packers draft class? I am over the moon about this class. I think we got some really impactful guys that are going to come in and make a difference. And while this Packers roster was already the youngest in the NFL last year and was ready to compete, I think they got some pieces that are going to add to and just take them further forward heading into 2024. I would love for you to share in the comments what you think of this draft class and what's your overall letter grade. I know everybody hates letter grades immediately after the draft. You haven't even seen them on the field yet, but I guess, would you give Goody a thumbs up, or would you, give him a thumbs down? I'm curious what you have to think, and we'll be back tomorrow. We'll talk a bit more about the overall draft class, and then we'll get into, if we get some confirmations about these, UDFA signings that we had, we'll talk a bit more in detail about them as well. But thank you for joining me this morning. I appreciate you always coming out and checking out the Pancakes and Packers morning show. Love for you to come in and join the conversation, get into the chat, and we'll start to talk about this offseason and what the roster looks like heading into 2024. We'll see you next.